So for me, when I bring myself to this work, I have the lofty hope of changing the world and the very baseline of let me get this out and see what happens. For me, 9 times out of 10, the things come back around. But yeah, being precious it's a self-fulfilling prophecy and it gets in your way.
Welcome back to Puppeteers. We're your hosts, Adam Krutinger
and Cameron Garrity.
And returning again, we have the wonderful Marie Keevins. Welcome back to the show.
Hi, guys. Thanks for having me.
So good to have you back. And for anyone who doesn't know, Marie Keevins is a wonderful puppeteer and friend. Most recently, she has worked as the Puppet Supervisor on the Apple TV Plus Sesame workshop show, Helpsters, and is also the Associate Artistic Director at the Eugene O'Neill Theater Center for the National Puppetry Conference, is a producer, a director, a writer in her own right, working on things like some wonderful projects that we'll talk about, but including Zwerge and The Elephant in the Room, just all sorts of wonderful talent, and we're so glad to have her back on the show. Marie Keevins, welcome back to Puppeteers.
Oh, thank you. Don't make me cry.
We'll do our best to keep it dry today.
Yeah, and I just want to mention for the listeners, too, this, like I said before, this is your returning episode, and in the first episode, we learned a lot about your origin story, getting into puppetry, going on to UConn, and many of your projects, so make sure you check out that episode, too, and in this one, we want to get deeper into the projects that you've done, but before we get too much into that, let's just start off with what are you working on now?
Oh, Lord.
Or maybe more appropriately, what should you be working on now? If that's a different answer.
What would you have been working on? Yes.
Yeah. I'm working on surviving COVID like the rest of us, right? I have been working on face masks mostly, right? To get through COVID, I pivoted and to help my community. I live in Brooklyn, in the heart of Brooklyn, where we've been hit really hard. So I've been pivoting my work and focusing towards making face masks and donating them. But outside of that, I've been doing a lot of work on the National Puppetry Conference, which just wrapped after pivoting from a live conference to an online platform, which was quite the adventure. And then also I was supposed to be in Atlanta about a month ago, preparing for a show that would go up in November. So we'll see what that turns out to be and when it will happen. It will happen. It's just when and how.
Has it officially been postponed yet?
Yeah, so I was supposed to be there at the end of March, preparing and doing the first. I think they've done 2 workshops without myself. So this is Elephant in the Room. And myself and my collaborator, Sa Ngauja. Sa was on Broadway in Moulin Rouge and just got nominated for a Tony. So I was supposed to go to Atlanta without him to workshop in March and April, and then we would go back in November where the show would open, and we would both go down for that rehearsal process. And that's all been put on hold. However, that show's really timely, so we have every confidence that it will go up, and it will go up in that city.
Can you tell us a little bit about that project? Because it's one that I know I've been seeing on the periphery of you working on it for quite some time, but would love to have you share a little bit about that show and its development process.
Sure. So that show, it's yet to get to its final fruition, but we take solace in that the format before where we are in the world now was 7 years to Broadway for most Broadway shows. So if you got there in 7 years, it was a win. And we were 6 years to getting picked up in Atlanta, so we felt like that was a win. Atlanta was one of the top 3 cities that we wanted to be in. So that show basically is about the story of 2 little girls. One is an elephant and one is a refugee. They're from the same towns in Congo, and one is a refugee to Brooklyn. And basically it compares these 2 girls' stories and where they intersect and where they don't. And it talks a lot about what happens when you take away societal norms. So when a child loses their parental figures or their caretakers, what happens? When they're left to their own devices, they often join gangs and, because we need community. Animals do the same thing. They act out humans act out in acts of aggression. Animals do the same thing. This is an animal instinct. And so we compare what's happening in the jungle to that of the urban jungle through the eyes of these two little girls. But we try to focus most of the story through the eyes of the elephants. We talk about elephant tusking and what the repercussions are of that globally. So through the environment, economics, what the societal breakdown is of the jungle. Like it's really deep, basically. It's deep. So when we joke that it's a every issue show, like name it, we're in some way talking about it without trying to directly talk about it. And It's an Afrobeat style, not completely Afrobeat. There's some disco, there's some other stuff in there, musical, with puppets, projection, human actor. It's a lot. And a concert. There's a concert on stage.
Wow, that's awesome. Who did the music for that?
Saw did the music. I wrote some of the songs with him. We'll probably in the end bring in one more person, because there's something that we're looking for that we haven't found yet. Although who knows, now we have a fresh time away from it, maybe we'll come up with what that missing thing is. But yeah, it's fun and different, it's just different, but it's big. I was mentioning to Cam in an earlier conversation, that show is the show that I always advise puppeteers not to build. Don't write that show. Who's going to do that show? Where are you going to find the money for that show? So I wrote that show, and here we are. And so you asked about the process. We've been through 5 or 6 residencies, one of which was up by you guys in Art Park. It started with a residency on Nantucket, the last place you would think to write an Afrobeat musical. And I wrote that script by myself, that first draft. So it's been a long process, and it came out of a story that was in the New York Times about elephant tusking that was really horrific. And I didn't know Saw. I met him at an event, and I thought, you're the guy. And I went over to him and said, I live in Brooklyn too, can we have coffee? And I pitched him, and by the end of the pitch, he was in tears. And 7 years later, we're brother and sister and trying to get this show up. So yeah, that was the least linear way I could tell you that story. Sorry.
No, that's okay. And two things I want to say to kind of respond to some of what you said. The first being, it's just really interesting, and I'm sure, this is me not having seen it and only hearing your description of it, but just like the concept of, showing that story of how any kind of disruption of the natural state of things in an antagonistic way can have these ripple effects. So it's not just, tusking an elephant or removing it from its space or putting someone, a refugee, in a new environment. It's also, what happens when we start, polluting our forests or doing all these really horrible things that we think is just a contained action that has these horrible rollouts in other parts of our society, I think is really incredible.
It's interesting. Somebody once said to me, we were talking about the elephant tusking, and they were very into this same issue. And there's also rhino tusking involved. And the little girl, spoiler alert, our little one, her name is Little One. Her best friend's name is One Tusk, and she's an elephant, a rhinoceros who's been adopted by the tribe. And so how they use their tusks is so different because of where they come out of their face. And somebody said to me, well, honestly, if you think about it, if they just take the tusks and they were able to save the elephant, like not have it bleed out or anything, like if they just saved the elephant, would it be that big a deal? And I was like, if we took out all of your teeth, you would get dentures because you need to eat, right? Like there would be another way about this. And the elephant's tusks, they churn the land. When they walk, they churn the land. When you take off their tusks, they get depressed, which means they don't move, which means the land doesn't churn for all the other animals that live on it. Like it's a very complex issue. And so, it's interesting to me to hear what you just said about how the ripple effect is not small. It may not be obvious, but it's not small.
Absolutely. And what I also would love to talk to you a little bit about, and I'm sure anyone who's produced their own work can infer based on how complex your working process is and who you're working with. But why would this be a show that you would recommend to puppeteers not to make themselves?
Well, because it's 7 years, so that gets hard and lonely. It's very expensive, and I think I wouldn't say don't do it. I just advise people to look at things differently. Like, the reason that we continued on this path is because we have another script. We do have a script that can happen with 2 actors in a small tabletop show, and we purposefully wrote the script that way so that it could go into classrooms, it could go into, but we want to do the big one. But we have this other being. For me, starting small helps people see it, brings people to it, and then you can grow from there. I wouldn't say to a puppeteer, most puppeteers right out of the gate, like, just go, and why shouldn't Broadway be your goal? Which, by the way, for us, Broadway was not our goal. Our goal was world music stages, because there's, I think it's 200,000 people go to one world music concert. So we thought if we could do this there, think about all the people who would learn from this piece by accident, right? Because they think they're seeing a cool show, but really they're getting information. So that's where we were going with it. But yeah, I would say for most puppeteers, like, when you can start small, you can grow it. We just, I don't know, we just didn't.
So what might you give to as advice to other puppeteers who want to build a big show like this?
I would start small, honestly.
Yeah. But I guess in this process of even knowing that it's going to take this long, like 7 years, like you're talking, I'm sure at some point it just feels like, oh my gosh, like, should we go on to something new? Or like, what makes you decide to keep pushing at a point rather than moving on to something different?
Because it keeps being relevant.
Yeah.
Black Lives Matter, COVID, our current president. I can go down a list of things that I know are directly related to this material. I know that we wrote something, that there will be moments of the show that will date themselves over time, but they could easily be replaced with something else. Like, we were so strategic in the way that we wrote this piece, and it matters to us. Like, when we talk, we cry.
Yeah.
You know, like, those and it's not, myself and my collaborator we have a deal. We know what our numbers are for, like, if somebody wanted to buy this and put it on a shelf because it competes with something they're doing, we know what that number is, that we're willing to just sell it and make it go away. We know what our number is, that if somebody said we want, because we had somebody come to us and say, I'll produce it as a film. And then, but it was not even starter money for Broadway, never mind for a film. I was like, this isn't a film that I want to do. The budget you're giving me is not, it wasn't for a short film. Like, just wasn't enough. And so we just keep talking, and we check in every few months, and we just say, where are we? How do we feel about it? And we just keep doubling down. Like, we believe in this material. And we also believe that if somebody says, a Kevin McCullum, that was a plug and a bag, came along and said, I like your script, I want to bring in a different writer and a different songwriter, we know who we would trust to take over. So take over. And I got 12 more ideas in my head I really want to go do, you know? So we're aware on a commercial level at what point we're willing to leave, but on a storytelling level, it matters to us that this story happens.
Yeah.
Did I answer your question?
Yeah, definitely. I'm just wondering, because I see it. It's such a beautiful project. You guys are so passionate about it, and it looks like it's really building. But I know I see a lot of other people try to do big projects, and sometimes, and again, also just looking at things peripherally, sometimes you don't know exactly what's going on. But it looks like it's like, wow, they're spending a lot of time on this project that maybe they could be more productive moving on to something else. So I think that's a great advice for people to keep pushing.
Yeah, and I think for me, it's not the only thing I'm doing.
Of course.
Maybe is why it's taking so long. I don't know, you know, but I am doing other things, and I am working on other projects, and so is Saw. And we did hit a point, I would say it was like the 4th year. This sounds so ridiculous to say out of my own mouth, just hearing myself. But I would say somewhere around the 4th year, we used to meet every single Sunday for 4 years. And that was our minimum amount of time we met every week. And we said, okay, we're at the point where we need somebody else to come in. We need either money to do. I think we did a concert at that point, but we needed something to move to the next stage. And we did it, and then we put it aside. And now everything that we've done since then has been when there was opportunity. We look for the opportunity. We're constantly looking, but I'm no longer writing 500 grants for this thing.
Yeah.
You know, I've hit the point where I'm like, when a theater comes along and they want to write the grant, they're welcome to put my name on it. You know, like, please keep going, you know? So that's how this happened with Atlanta. Somebody contacted SAW and said, push in Atlanta. And they said, you know, we're looking for something edgy. We have this building. We want to be topical. It's important to us that we incorporate the African-American community here. And that's the whole piece is. So perfect.
So were you pitching it to different theaters?
Very little. Because
Yeah.
really we had kind of just like,
Yeah.
it was so much time. And we knew we'd come back to it, but SAW was getting some films and I had gotten Helpsters, and, you know, we just were like, the universe will tell us. And we just keep in interviews talking about it, making sure we get the information out there so that somebody will come to us. And then that's what happened.
Yeah.
They might see you in an interview like this and notice your email address right at the bottom of the screen, and then what they know right where to find you. I want to ask this question, and I don't mean to ask it in a it's almost being a devil's advocate and also just being curious about you know, you say that you're doing puppets of the elephants and the rhinos, and in other sort of large scale productions we've seen you know, large animal puppets before. You know, obviously there's the Lion King, but also Circus 1902, 1903, or and obviously War Horse is a different thing, but it's still large animals interacting with humans. What do you have to say either to yourself, but probably more so to people who are funding this, who might have an impulse to say, well, we're not going to back this because there's already another thing with an elephant in a different context? Or like, is that something that you have to mentally prepare for, or am I just overthinking it in
No, we've
just
had
this
those
conversation?
No, we've had those conversations, and we've watched a lot of film. We've gone to a lot of shows to see how it compares to things. Like, there's a couple stories with animals that I could see people coming after us, but it's because we're all using the same formula. It has nothing to, like, go ahead, take me to court for that, because I'm ready for you. Like, it's the same storytelling devices that we use. So that I'm not so worried about that. I feel like the way that the script is written, we talk a lot about zooming in and zooming out. So, like, for example, let's just say that there's a projection on the back of the screen and you see the surface of an elephant, and then it blinks, and when it blinks, we're in the watering hole, and then something on stage comes alive, right? That's not the Lion King.
Right. Yeah, no, absolutely.
Right? So how do we take space and change it? How do we recode? And that's why SAW is a perfect collaborator for me. Like, as we continue to talk about puppets today, like, you'll see, like, there's common themes in all of my work, but one of them is coding. And SAW thinks the same way. How do we adjust planes? How do we, so that we see the show from this way and now we see it from this way? How did it change, and why? Why did that matter? We think a lot, like, about those things. So when it comes to what else is out there, like, I don't want a giant elephant to walk down the aisles of the theater. I've seen that. Julie Taymor did a beautiful job with that. I just want to believe that what I see in front of me is an elephant, and when it hurts, I hurt, and when it has joy, I experience joy. So the workshop that we did in Buffalo, we played with fabric, and we wrapped it around the people's heads, and then as they unwinded it, it became elephants, and then they moved, and then they played with the fabric and pushed it aside, and the whole show in that incarnation, and likely the final one, takes place in a couture dress shop. So they're sewing, and as the fabric comes out, the little girl's on the floor and she's playing. You know, like, we're looking for ways to make everything turn into these creatures, to make the environment turn into the jungle. You know, And ultimately, if we have a director that neither of us are that involved with, they'll figure out how they see it happening. We definitely wrote it in the script, but we wrote the devices as options.
Got it. Yeah, so you give whoever is then handed that text in the future the that freedom to make the choice themselves in concert with whatever they're envisioning as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And
That's
along this way, along the journey, Saw came to me and he said, we have to talk about a play that I've been asked to audition for. And I was like, is it Malima's Tale? And he was like, how do you even know about this play? You've got to be kidding me. Malima's Tale was written by Lynn Nottage, who I am itching to get to the O'Neill for the Puppetry Conference, but she was writing a play about the same king elephant that we had studied. And I saw that and was like, here's the difference between he and I and Lynn Nottage, other than she's Pulitzer Prize winning. She's going to get to Broadway a lot faster than we are because she's Pulitzer Prize winning, right? So that show I had been watching, but I didn't tell him because I didn't want to freak him out. He got cast as, guess what? Elephant. And he was like, they're asking me to audition. I'm like, I already know about it. Go ahead. And because what matters is that the information gets out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right? So if that show had become the most famous show in the world, like it had taken off like Hamilton, then we would have put our show down. Right? But it spoke to a niche audience. It was wildly popular and won a lot of awards, and rightfully so, and so did Sa. But Sa told me at the end of the rehearsal process, he told her what he was working on. And she was like, oh, that's why you got that and that and that. Yeah. So, we're going to have competing stories always.
Right. But that's really, I think it's a really admirable thing, the way you just talked about, like, had they gotten the message across and had they really, blown up from a cultural standpoint, that you would have, had that presence of mind and been okay with stepping aside from it. Because I think a lot of people, they kind of cling to things and they want to, they want it to be them who's making the cultural impact. And I think it's really lovely that, your whole, work ethic and mentality is just like, let's get this information out there to make our world a better place.
Yeah. And I know that all along, thank you for saying that. All along, we've done various iterations for very small groups of people, 100 people audiences and 20 people audiences. And the one we did in Buffalo, they were like, well, we're hoping we'll get like 4 or 5 people, and the place was packed and they didn't know what to do. You just never know. But I know that all of those people were impacted. So if that's the amount of people that we impacted, we did that. That's okay. And I also think you never know who you impact. You can be having conversation with someone in a bar about this project and they've never seen it, but they go home and do the research and are talking to people, and it gives them an idea. Next thing you know, they've got a gallery show about something like minutely related that came out of your conversation. You don't know.
Absolutely.
But yeah, I'm not precious about those things. I am precious about working. Like, I need to be doing.
Right. No, and I just think about, and this is me adding a completely selfish anecdote here, but you and I both had a similar idea about the selection of produce and how it ends up in markets, and we had that really funny interaction a couple of years ago of like, you stole my show.
Now think about COVID, right? I want to come up with the song because it happens in my head when I'm in the grocery store. Now it's yours. Now it's yours. You touched it. Now it's yours. Now, why are you putting that back? You touched it. It's yours. I don't care what I felt like. It goes in the basket.
That's right.
I choose not to do that because I think it might not have the response that it has in my heart. But what are you doing?
Right. Yeah, no, absolutely. It's the same thing of wanting to like fix people's masks for them in the grocery store, and obviously you don't do that, but
no.
Yeah, or they just have the mask hanging over their ear or down under their nose.
I was gonna say that the nose hanging out of the mask is what really gets me. But
I often walk by and go, it's like this. And then I keep going.
It's like this.
So close.
yeah.
Imagine if we did that with all of our other clothes. So like, our shirt's a little high, or that. That's right. It's like, oh my gosh, you're not wearing that right.
Belt on when your pants are so low.
So you mentioned that all of your work, this is the stupidest flex ever I'm about to make, but you mentioned that all of the work that you make sure that you're associated in deals with coding, which is a fun switch over to working on the Helpsters.
Look what you did there.
There we go. But you, as we mentioned at the top of the show, are the puppet supervisor for that. Can you tell us, first of all, what that job entails, and then specifically how that manifested itself on the set of the Helpsters?
Yeah, I don't know what it entailed before me, but I can tell you what it entailed with me.
Sure.
I think puppet supervisor is a different role in different productions, but overall, the whole idea is that person is overseeing all workshop things, all production things, all on-set things. The puppet captain handles the puppeteers, and works in tandem with the puppet supervisor to make sure that all needs are met. So, if they're on set, let's just say we're shooting and the puppeteer is on set and somebody needs to cut a hole in a bed over here, I've already seen the script. I've talked with the puppet captain, or they've talked with me and said, this is what I want to make sure is there. And then I'll talk with the production designer and say, okay, this, I know that they said that everything needs to be 4 feet high, but this one needs to be 3 feet high because of this consideration of where they want to put their body. So there's all different facets of it. It's a lot of budgeting. It's a lot of looking at scripts and saying, we have this, we don't have that. Or you could have this and, looking for ideas of what we can make, what we have in the shop, who's available. It's a lot of management, but it's creative management. Yeah. It's saying, okay, your idea is amazing. We want to make it even more amazing. This is the resources it's going to take to do this and the skill it's going to take to do it. And then it's identifying and following through.
I think some people might be wondering, what would you say is the exact difference between a puppet supervisor and the puppet captain? So
a puppet captain is focused, again, show by show, right? There are some shows where this isn't the case, but for the most part, the puppet captain is focused on looking at the script, going through the script and saying, okay, we need these puppeteers here on this day. They're focused on the puppeteers. Where I'm focused on everything that the puppeteer is going to need.
Okay.
And then the puppet captain works in tandem with the puppet supervisor to make sure that everything is moving together. We both look at footage for post-production and say, this could be better, that could be better. But the puppet supervisor tends to give a lot more notes for editing because they're looking at the performance. I'm not looking at the performance, but I'm not responsible for that. I am responsible for, there's a giant rod coming out of that back corner, and every time that puppet turns this way, it looks like it's going to penetrate their head. Please don't use the angle with that rod because there's going to be a child who's worried about it. Like, I look at, things that we have set up in shots. That probably isn't the best example, but just things that are dangerous and don't read properly that I know throw off the illusion. That's the best way to describe it. I know throw off the illusion, right? Because the whole thing is about illusion. What we're doing is performance, and it's not, I wouldn't say it's magic, but it's magic, right? Like, look over here, I'm alive, and if something over here is dead, we lost the illusion.
Right.
So we look for different things.
I see. Yeah. So did you come in at that position? Because from what I understand, you were also involved in a lot of pre-production coordinating too, right?
Yeah. So I came to that project with a lot of companies. I work with them to help them on their bids, to help them speak the language of the client, because I worked particularly with Puppet Heap, but I have such client-heavy relationships. I understand what the client wants to hear. And sometimes what you're saying, while it is factual and accurate to what they're asking for, you're not saying it in a way that is a way that they can hear it. So I was brought on by Monkey Boys to help them fill out their proposal for Sesame Street or their bid in a way that made it clear that they could do the work. And so you have to bring a ton of confidence to the table. And they're like, we know how to do this. We've got the team. It's going to be great. So they brought me on to help do that. So I do a lot of liaising. In life, I do a lot of liaising.
I was going to say.
You've made a career out of it.
Yeah, I made a career out of liaising.
Oh gosh, there was something else I was.
Not even a verb. Did I just make up a word?
So no.
Who knows?
So you were responsible for kind of putting together some of the team as well.
Yeah, the whole team, the puppet team. So not the performance team, although I did have conversations with people about that. But the workshop. So I chose the designer and the head wrangler and who was doing our props for it, not for the prop department, but for the puppet department. I hired that team and maintained that team. And for me, it was really important that that team encompass faces that we know from the Sesame Muppet history, you know, all of the TV shows that have come before that were so popular, and also new voices.
Yeah.
That was really important because I felt like this show was fresh and new and different, and we needed to focus on diversity of every kind. And that we had really fresh perspectives. And I think we did that. I mean, I feel really good about what we did. And I feel really good about what we did in terms of teamwork. I feel like we took people who didn't know each other and we built a family of people who rooted for each other and all agreed that whatever's the best idea on the table wins.
Yeah.
And, we just tried to keep our egos to ourselves.
Yeah,
and that's wonderful.
And I think it shows itself in the final product. I mean, it's such a fun show to watch. Obviously completely outside of the target demographic for it, but just you could tell when people are having a good time in making a show. And then, of course, I have the benefit of knowing some of the people who worked on it, too, and just hearing their anecdotal experiences and things like that. It just sounded like a really warm set and a positive experience. And
that comes all the way from the top, you know? Everybody was like, listen, we are taking old, tried and true techniques, and we want to push on them. So let's push on them. Let's honor them. But what else? You know, what do you bring to it? What's funny? I have to tell you, I love how many times I heard at production meetings, that's funny, yes. Or like, oh, okay, you know, if somebody would be reading something and they'd say, this isn't the funniest idea. What else? That's just a joy. That's just a joy. Or if somebody in that moment says, do we want to be funny here? And everyone's like, ooh, that's a joy. Like, when does that happen? And I've been very blessed in my career, but that project and everybody on it says it was just so much fun to be throwing stuff out.
Absolutely. And we talked a little bit about this with Marty, but it's also really cool that, as you said, going further from what the Sesame Street Muppets kind of have established, like. You guys were able to create more cartoons in the real world on that show. Just examples of like Mr. Prim's hands going out all over the place and doors being different every time you open them. And it had this zany, otherworldly thing happening that so had the handprints of puppeteers and people who like, and strong writers and all that sort of things. But it was people understanding what the capability of those puppets were able to do, which is just really fun to watch. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, pushing.
Was there anything else that you wanted to say about the Helpsters or speak to that experience necessarily?
I think with Helpsters, and to speak to that experience, I would say that the thing that I was most joyous about and maintain the most joyous about outside of my phenomenal team that I couldn't be more proud of, and I'm grateful to Sesame for letting me take the risk on people that maybe they were less familiar with, but I'm most proud of the message of that show, and that you can be useful and you can have meaningful moments in the world and still have fun. It's okay to have fun. And the show worked really hard to send quiet messages of diversity, and I think it did that, and I'm really proud of that. I think we did that on my team. I think the show did that. I'm very proud of it, and I'm very proud that when we as a country moved into the pandemic, or the world, Helpsters kept helping. And
yeah, the Helpsters Help You specials were just really, really great. And like, thank goodness that Stephanie had Cody with her. And
no, we got Cody to her.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Marty seemed to think that she already had her from another appearance or something. I apologize.
No, we couldn't get him his character, but that's what a puppet supervisor does.
Yeah.
In the middle of the pandemic, we get the puppet. So yeah, no, we got her Cody, and thank God, because they were able to do all this great stuff. Yeah. Anyway, that's what I'm most proud of, is that the Helpsters continue to put a helpful voice out in the world. And I didn't write the show. I don't have anything to do with any of that, but it just, to be a Helpster on Helpsters is pretty cool.
Yeah, I was, I think I brought it up with Marty too. I really enjoyed the Helpsters Help You. I thought, not only was it just like well produced, but I thought really it was a perfect perspective of how the virtual calls can look for kids. And I expect, because a lot of times these people, I know there was, because of some of the resources, that not everyone could get their puppets, but I think it actually worked even better though, because sometimes it is just an icon, and look at the connection the characters were still able to make with each other, which I think is a really great lesson for kids.
Yes, I couldn't agree more. And Sesame Workshop's doing amazing work right now too. It's just fantastic to see puppetry, not surprising to any of us, but to see the mainstream world embracing it and recognizing that they need it right now. And the need for puppetry is a really specific thing that people can't always put their finger on. So to see society calling upon it and maybe not even knowing why is pretty great.
Definitely. And one other thing I'll say too is that what you were saying about being a Helpster on Helpsters, I'm a real geek for when things are true to form. And my mom for a long time was a teacher. She was a teacher for 12 years and then a vice principal at the same school for 4 years. And her and I would always joke, especially because I would do some like design work for the school and stuff. Like, if you're a school where they teach grammar, your brochures and stuff that go out need to follow those same grammar rules. And like, you want your teachers who are, supposed to be these role models for the kids to follow the same dress code as the kids. And it's kind of, I really admire when a show like that is able to walk its talk, so to speak.
It's funny to hear you say that. I was just thinking, so in the background, these plants, that is from the studio. And then this one is the top of a pineapple that our camera person, Pat Minetta, who's now passed, so I named that plant Pat Minetta, he said, you have to plant the top of the pineapple, you have to. And I was like, I don't know how to do this. And he taught me. And I love gardening, so I have this pineapple there. But that day there was a whole pineapple theme on set, and everybody came in, pineapple sunglasses, pineapple shirts. You're in a good place when everybody's like, oh, it's mustache day.
Yeah.
I'm down for that. Like, it was just a really fun place where people would just pick up on something and run with it. And when you were the person that the joke was on, you'd see that person like, why is everyone doing this? Until it
finally clicks.
Yeah, but it was all about the script,
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's very special that people would just pick up on stuff, and you'd realize everyone around you picked up on that little thing. How cool.
No, that's really beautiful.
I would not change that experience for the world. And the few things that we learned, I'm glad we learned. And I think the most important thing is that those messages of love and kindness and deductive reasoning, which is not something that we purposefully teach children these days, that from what I can see, having that be such a core part of the curriculum is just so great. Like, where do your feelings and deductive reasoning intersect? Because they do.
Yeah.
It was pretty great.
Sometimes when you're producing something brand new, you don't know what it's going to be. Like how amazing would it be to have a full, like, behind the scenes documentary type thing of, like, the very first episode of Sesame Street or the Muppets, because you don't know what you have until it's there, and then you always look back like, oh boy, it would have been nice just to have some other people filming in the background. So yeah, no, I wonder how many companies think about having that as part of the production team, just like behind the scenes footage, just because
Little
even from a standpoint of documenting what you do.
And Adam and I try to do that as well with either at the very least behind the scenes photographer. But
yeah, I agree with you, Adam. It's one of those precious things. Like, but on the other hand, I was once in a meeting with a very with Disney, with a project that was very high.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you know, like, we're not allowed to talk about it, blah blah blah, and there were cameras in every corner of the room. And I was like, what is going on? And finally I said to one of the people, just joking, because the meeting was getting, like, really tense, because there was somebody in the room who didn't fit the flow, right? There was, like, that one person who didn't know what they were walking into, and somebody cracked an inappropriate joke, and everybody, like, you know. And so I leaned over and was like, if anybody picks their nose, that's going to be what shows up on film 30 years from now. And that one person lost it, and, like, hysterical laughing. And when we finished, my boss on that project said to me, whatever you said, that mic is going to get turned up to here.
Uh-huh.
And I was like, oh, sorry. And then I told them what I said, and they got hysterical laughing. I'm like, that's funny.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's really funny.
Yeah, archival footage is precious.
Oh, it really is, you know, and I've, you know, I take a lot of archival footage of like almost everything that I do, even meetings and stuff, and I think it is important, and I don't think many people look back and say, oh, you know what, I wish I had less footage of how I did this, you know. So yeah, you know, you almost tend to always wish you had more, and we're kind of talking about this with Pam loosely, about just, like, documenting, you know, your projects as part of, you know, everything, and creating some sort of archival system. And if you can at least do that for yourself, you know, not only will you thank yourself later, but down the line, other people will too.
And when it comes to building, you had brought up earlier, for me, like, if we're rushing and there's just, like, that's not happening. If there's a pattern, you're lucky. To me, at the end, I try to take everything that's on the table and put it all together and write on a note what it is and stick it in the middle and just take a picture. Mm-hmm. So at least I know, like, this was the wire, and then that's in there, and that's in there. Like, having that, you need to go back, is a gift to your future self, right? So those little things are great. And also they're fun. They're fun pictures.
Yeah.
We're such nerds, guys.
I know.
Yes, we are.
I'm such a nerd. That's great. Well, you know what? You gotta love what you do. You know, if you don't love it, how could you expect someone else to love it?
Yes. Yeah.
You know, that shines through your work. You know, you can tell when something had a lot of heart and love put into it, and that's what the audience responds with on every project, whether it's the puppetry, whether it's the writing, whether it's the music or the dance or whatever it is. That's what people are really responding to, that connection. That people respond to passion, I think.
Yes, absolutely. I was mentioning to Cam earlier that I, pre-COVID, was pivoting, and as I normally am, and pivoting into, you know, what else could Little Shadow be, and who am I, right? Like, what's my truth? Because puppets is massive in my life, for sure. But coaching people, being infinitely curious and asking questions, looking for places where things intersect, and then examining that story, that's where my puppetry comes from, is that curiosity and that looking for intersections. And it's something that happens naturally. I don't necessarily know that it's happening when it's happening. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. connecting people. And so I was looking to, and I still will, but like I was meeting with different theaters around the city and putting together a speaker series and all of that. And it's because my passion outside of puppetry and storytelling is listening to stories and pulling them out of people like you guys do, right? You give a topic and they trust you, and so then they speak. And when there isn't a connection, you help them draw the connection, because there's always one, right? And then get passionate about that and get excited about that. And for me, that's where I am right now. It's like, what am I most excited about, and how can I get those vibrations into the world? Because I can't do another 7 years.
Right.
Right? Like, there's got to be other vehicles in which to do them. I just taught a class today that was about shadow journaling through shadow puppetry. And I had done a class years ago where I did with seniors, where it was journaling through toy theater, and taking pictures and objects from your home and telling a story. And it occurred to me, like, well, I could do one of these every single week and put them out in the world. Mm-hmm. Because it's just paper, and it's a poem. It's not even like 3 lines, go, you know? But if you're passionate about it and you feel like you have to tell that story, maybe it has a place to live.
Not only that, I think creating that way makes you more creative.
I agree.
Because you only have so much headspace. And some people say the more creative projects you put out, the more you're allowing to come in.
You know, I have a working relationship with Wyatt Cenac, and Wyatt, I respect in so many ways it would embarrass him, but he'd be mortified. But I have so much respect for that man. And he's doing this Tuesday, Thursday. I don't know if you guys have seen it on Instagram. He calls it the Happy Hour Record Club. It's at 6 p.m. Oh, it's happening right now. 6 p.m. on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And he's on Instagram. He does an Instagram Live. He plays a record of his choice. He tells a story of who the show is sponsored by, and it'll be like sponsored by Pan Am, or the unwrapped piece of candy in the bottom of his grandmother's purse. Whoever the show is sponsored by, and then based on whoever it's sponsored by, he gives a prompt, and you draw until the record's over.
I saw you did a drawing of hands on a clock recently.
Yeah,
okay.
It was clock on a hand, and mine was I was literally on it for 10 minutes. And the last thing I had drawn was Havarti cheese. That was the prompt. And but I put it out online because I thought, if I do it, because that's part of it, is that you're supposed to tag it and put it on an Instagram, and that's not really my style. But it did it because I know now I'll do another one. And It's going to keep me drawing, and my drawing style isn't like everyone else's drawing style, and I'm not an illustrator. I don't expect to be in the Society of Illustrators anytime soon, although, you know, they don't have to lose my number. But, you know, however that turns out for me, if it's just inspiring me and inspiring somebody else, then cool. But I was so grateful to Wyatt, because I signed on one day and I said, Wyatt, I actually have to make masks while I'm doing this. And he's like, cool, make masks. Try to do one that's inspired by, and then he gave the prompt. And I did a mask inspired by his prompt. So to your point, Adam, like, as long as you just keep doing it and keep finding it, more will come. And I have to tell you, doing the O'Neill this year, I was so exhausted, but inspired. So inspired that I'm like embarrassed by my own artistry.
What do you mean by that?
I feel like my bar needs to just be explored and raised and turned to the left and maybe painted purple. Like, where I was going is totally valid, and there's nothing wrong with it. And, you know, I'm not going there, but I want to come from a new angle now. Because the whole point to me of the conference, I had 2 words in mind the whole time. One was courage and one was pivot.
Yeah.
And you have to have the courage to pivot, and you have to have courage to pivot.
Yeah, that's a good point. It reminds me of another thing that people say, especially with artists, like, if you start to get comfortable, that's when you need a change. You're not being challenged.
Yeah, and I have an obscenely long list of things that I want to do by the time I'm, 65. And I won't do them all, but I hope that I do some of them, and I hope that I do them with completely different plans but the same intent. I know what my intent is, but I don't have to. I'm going to give you an example, even though you didn't ask me. During the conference, Cam, this happened with you and I. During the conference, somebody was working on a piece, and I was rooting for this person, and we had heard that they were stuck on this idea for years, and they couldn't get it out. And I said to their mentor, when I was watching this piece, this is what I wanted to be seeing. I'm not suggesting that they do it, but it's what I was wanting, what I was craving. And so there's something in that need as an audience member that they're missing, right? They don't have to do it how I'm doing it, but that's what they're missing. There's a connection that wasn't happening. And they told the person my idea, and the person took the idea and then texted me and said, thank you so much. And I said, no, thank you for so much. That idea has been in my head for 20 years. Mm-hmm. And now it's yours. I don't ever need to do that show. I don't need to explore that idea, but it has been living there, and I have felt awful about it, because every so often I'm like, well, why don't I just do that thing? But when I saw them, I was like, here, this is yours if you want it. And now it's done. Now it's done. It doesn't have to be, that's what I mean about not being precious. It doesn't have to be my result. It doesn't have to be my story. I don't want credit. That's out. Now what? Mm-hmm. And with that came this flood of like, you know what else I want to do? Yeah, you're totally right, Adam. I'm going to be meditating on that all night.
And I think there's something that I really like where we're going with this. And I'm thinking even like sometimes just changing within the style of puppetry that you want to be working with. Adam and I are our main lane is the Muppet style puppeteering, but there are times where just to satisfy the story, it's that truth to form again of like, no, I need to do this with the marionette in my hand, or no, this part of the story demands tabletop or whatever. And it's sometimes
or put down the puppet.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. But it's having the courage to pivot. It's exactly what you said. You're still following the intent, but the only way you could be true to that is by letting, putting down your first idea because it was blocking you from pursuing the path that you needed to get to that initial intent, the true intention that you're trying to follow or reach.
Yeah. And there's no lack of courage in saying this isn't a puppet. Right. It's okay to say, this isn't the best form. As a matter of fact, do the world of puppetry a favor and don't force it to be a puppet when it's not.
Yes.
It's okay to say this is not a puppet.
Yeah. And that takes courage if you consider yourself just a puppeteer
Exactly my point.
Yeah.
Exactly my point. With the O'Neill, at one point I was like, why are you using a puppet? Why? And then when they tell you why, you're like, oh, you're not doing that.
Right.
Yeah. You need to do that thing that forced it to be a puppet.
For you personally, what kind of things do you look at that make you feel like it needs to be a puppet?
Great question. Mm-hmm. I could give you the 5-hour answer, but I won't. The biggest thing is, what do I want to do with this puppet? So, like, if I need this puppet to be physically assaulted or something like that, I don't want to do that to an actor. For me, I'm not comfortable with that as an audience member. I don't like watching somebody on stage getting assaulted. I'm so worried about the actor and the actor's safety, even if they've rehearsed it like crazy, that I'm not as engaged in the piece as I want to be. But in a puppet show, I've agreed that this thing is alive and breathing. And so when I take that life away, it becomes that much more powerful because you've imbued it with that and you've taken it. And so for me, that's a massive thing, is like, what's the value on this life and how am I going to treat it versus an actor. Also, like, what do you want to do with it? Like, does it need to fly?
Yeah.
Like, how do you make the impossible possible? So if that's part of the question, then puppet. Also, for example, in Zwerge, we didn't have the budget. I knew we never would for 7 actors in the family plus other actors, because that was a story of a family. So we had one person who held their family and lost their family, got separated from their family, took care of their family, but they were the holder of the family. That was numbers, but that's a perfectly reasonable reason to do puppets. I don't have that many cast members.
Right. Yeah, and I would imagine in that it also keeps focus exactly where you want it with that one actor, whereas having more people might take away from the impact of having that one person.
Yeah, and the other thing, it's funny, I've been thinking a lot about this, about how a lot of the work that I've been developing over the years, which, it's not widely seen work, and I'm okay with that, but I feel like I knew where I was going and why, and at this moment in time, it's become like exceedingly relevant. And how do you make that work happen now, and figuring it out. But when I watch some of the things that we're exploring and the ideas that we're exploring, that thing that you just said, Adam, of a character taken care of, and what that is, and not drawing too much focus away from it. I love the intimacy, and you'll see it like in any of my work. For example, within this group, in that particular show in Zwerge, the character has all of her family in suitcases, and this is another example of coding, right? Suitcases are families, in the suitcases are people, suitcases are families, and trunks are villages. So when you open a trunk, there were houses or Auschwitz or whatever, right? So that's a town. So we coded. And when the lead character, Perla, when her family is taken away from her, she always knows where that suitcase is. We move it on stage and you just see her just check, no matter what. And that not really only doesn't steal the focus, but it allows the puppet to be so much more important. So much more important, because we always have to know where it is. We always have to track it. And you can see if she's looking the other way and that suitcase is over there, the audience is not watching her. They're watching the suitcase because they're worried that she's not watching it. Mm-hmm. And so there's something about that protectiveness that people develop with puppets is really, really special. And I love being able to find space for it.
Yeah. Well, and there's something really nice too about, if your initial decision in this scenario was, we can't have 7 actors, let's have one actor and the puppet cast, then it's what other decisions need to be made thematically to justify that decision of, okay, now we have to have puppets. And then you layer in all that, those wonderful things of family and village and what it means with the trunks and the suitcases and all those different things. And it's kind of like when you make pastry and you keep folding in all the layers and layers and layers, and the more times you fold it, the more rich the dough becomes.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. I am attracted to working with collaborators. I don't like to work alone. I do work alone. I do make things alone, but they're short things. I like to work with collaborators because I like when somebody says what you just said, and then I think, yes, and, like it bumps up my ideas, and also my ideas aren't always the best. Like, what other ideas are out there, So yeah, for me, the more ideas that are on the table, the better, and the richer the possibility is, and sometimes people don't get all of it. Like in Zwerge, we did this moment. Spencer Lott was directing this workshop that we had done at Dixon Place that we produced. And at that point, that's when I was like, we need a producer. So we need a producer for that show. But because it's one step away from being done. But Spencer, he said to me, well, it's really silent in this moment. And I said, can there be a fly? And he was like, what? And I said, I have this image of this reoccurring fly from stories that I've read in about Auschwitz, about how you'd hear silence and then you just hear a buzz. And I said, can we see them at the beginning of their arrival kill the fly? And then at the end of the show, when they see a fly, they make sure to save it. Because life has become that much more precious.
Yeah.
Because that repeating sound effect, it becomes so much more important. You know, how do we find those little moments to make something so important? And that's what I'm always thinking about. I think I probably make people crazy in production meetings because I'm like, but what about the fly? Yeah. But when that moment is a minute in theater of tracking the fly, we've learned a lot about that life, you know? And when she can't find her family, she can't find the case where her family is, she can't find anyone else, that fly is the sign that there's still hope and that there's still life. Like, it matters, you know? It's finding that richness. And when I said to Spencer, I really want this fly, he said, well, let's try it in rehearsal, because if it takes up too much time. And then they added it in rehearsal, and he was like, whoa, we did the fly today. And I was like, yes, yeah, it stays. Yeah. I love that collaboration.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful.
Well, and when you can convince the other people on a production team that it's a really solid idea, where you try it in rehearsal and everyone buys into it, it makes, you know, your sound designer and your lighting people and everyone they kind of rally around that idea and want to make sure that it happens and happens in the most effective way. Yeah.
And it makes everyone important, right? Because they are.
Exactly.
I think it's funny, Cam, you were asking me beforehand, like, what are the messages and stuff? For me right now, like, this atmosphere, this is how your show works, so it's okay. But this constant living in a box and watching each other through a box and doing demos, and it gets to be a lot. And I think finding those points of connection and collaboration now are even more important to the human spirit than they are in the theater and are on set, because we need to be connected somehow. And if people can find ways to work on projects right now that are collaborative and find ways to include the lighting designer, like, listen, dude, I've got these 5 lights in my apartment, like, what can I do with it? And then give them credit at the end.
Yeah.
Like, when we get back in the theater, the respect that we're going to have for each other is going to be so much more. And I hope that people are doing those things.
Big
you know,
time.
You don't have to do it alone. This is the time to collaborate.
Yeah, and in 9 years, I've never missed Adam before, and I haven't seen him now in 4 months. And
I know.
I've missed you, Adam.
The icing on the cake is I've always wanted to be socially distant from Cameron, so now there's no excuse. No, I'm kidding.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, you know, I have one more question just to go back to when to use puppets, because I know at the O'Neill you get to see a lot of work that people are doing. What would you say is maybe the most common, I don't want to say mistake, but I can't think of another word, mistake people make in thinking something should be a puppet when it shouldn't?
Writing talky scripts that don't require puppets.
Yeah.
Like, okay, stop talking and do that script. What happened? Because when
that's something that
happens,
could just be. Yeah,
you're right.
Something that could just be a narration or a voiceover, or like you said, just a human could just probably do that better.
I have a problem just in life in production meetings of saying, this is a great radio play.
Yeah.
That doesn't make it bad. It makes it a great radio play. You know, please go do that. But if you want this to be a puppet show or a show that uses puppets, then let's figure that out. And let's doesn't have to be me. Like, go take it and sit with it and draw it out, and storyboards are good, but play. To me right now, everything that I'm seeing, and I get it, I totally get it, is that our sense of play is getting pushed on. And particularly parents, like, I want a family, and I'm convinced that the only reason that I don't have children right now is because I'm supposed to be using this time differently. I'm convinced, because the amount of ingenuity and play that has to constantly be exercised when you're at home with little ones right now is exhausting. How do we expect those same people to go and create?
Yeah.
Like, they're lucky that they made the mac and cheese, give them a break,
Right.
you know? But other people who have that bandwidth, please get together and create, like, because this is, it's a muscle and you have to be using it. I was just talking to a writer director in LA the other day, and they said, but they have the ability to have a nanny, and they live in a place where they're allowed to do that still, and they said, oh, I can't stop. All I've been doing is writing, and I'm like, I can't even imagine being able to think that long. I can't. But then go write a short play, like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Definitely.
I wonder if that's part of the problem is the writing process, because I feel like people are so trained to write wordy. How is it? I don't know if people are trained in the same way or think to write visually as much if they are literally scripting something.
I think everybody's different, and for me, and I think this comes from having the privilege of seeing so much at the O'Neill, and I do think that that's a privilege. To get to take a vacation into people's minds here and there is pretty lucky. But I think some people need to write, some people need to play, some people need to have a finished, pretty object that they work with. I think every process is different. Eric Bass and I were talking one time, and we were talking about Zwerge, and I said, I really want your feedback on this, because I know he'll tear it apart, and that's okay. Like, I want him to. And he said, what do you want me to do? Read a script? You wrote a script? He was so like, oh my God. But we really felt like we needed to. And we had, the first script was like 3 pages. It's since grown into a full script, and there's music and all the stuff. But when it started, it was a short little thing, and we put 2 people in a room with an overhead projector and some paper, and we were literally cutting out in the room. We did play, and from the playing came the words and the rhythm and the things that we thought could be there, that we had in an outline. We explored, and we thought, okay, here's what we've learned, now let's play again. Eric is like, no, get a couple puppets and get in a room and play, and then you'll learn exactly what the puppets need to be, and you'll know what the script needs to say. That's not my process.
Right.
Yeah.
But for me, I have to research things to death. He apparently does too. Who knew? Right? 2 different processes.
Mm-hmm.
And then not only that, I think those having different processes, like you said, collaborating with people can help it work better like that. Because like me and Cameron have very different processes. Cameron likes to plan it out and write it, and I like to jump in, because again, that's how I feel like I find characters better, by like making the puppet, playing with it. Like, okay, this is the personality of this character, then I can write for it. Where Cam's like, oh, you're wasting materials by building something that might not be right for the project. So, and again, that's why I like to argue that we do our best projects together, because we get a little bit of both sides.
Yes. I love working with Roger Danforth. I always say this to people, because Roger comes in and he has done this. Why is that puppet here? And don't tell me because you built it.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Like, he just takes that away before you even bother saying it. Or he'll sit with your script, and this makes him sound mean, and he's not. But he sits with your script, and he like just rips out a page and throws it on the floor. like, okay, well, you just told me that in 1 line. Why are there 5 more pages discussing it? You told me, and it's a puppet show, so you're probably going to show me. Shut up.
Mm-hmm.
And those exercises, I think that for me, like you say, is where collaboration is so important, because I don't want to be precious. I will say that on every project, if I have written the words, there's always 1 line that I just can't get rid. I don't know what that is. I really don't. I think it's like a mommy complex or something. Like, at some point, my mom was like, I like that line. And I kept it. Like, I don't know where it's coming from. Like, somebody said something to me, and that line became important. But outside of that, like, go ahead, tear up the script. I don't care.
Right.
What I care about is the intent, and that the characters read how I mean them to. Like you said, Adam, through play, you find, oh, this is actually this character. I thought it was this.
That's actually something that I wanted to ask, because you had a really succinct answer to why should something be a puppet show versus a radio script. I'm going to ask this because I know I've been guilty of doing this, but something that I'm sure you've seen as well and have maybe had to address with people either at the O'Neill or elsewhere. But when should it be a puppet show versus a therapy session? And just
if you have to ask the question,
that's a great
the
question.
answer is therapy session.
Well, no, and of course, but it's interesting because I was thinking about, and again, I'm speaking selfishly at this point, but like the same thing you were saying of like, well, once you get the point across and enough people hear it, you know, then you're able to put it away or let it be out there. And I know, again, because I'm one of those people, and I know other people who are this way of like, oh, once you let that out on a sheet of paper, or you do it for a room in a pub audience or whatever, it's like, oh, I could let that go now. And it must be difficult sometimes to see people who don't have that presence of mind to do that, and then they like try to run with it for 6 or 7 years or whatever. I don't know why I brought that up necessarily, or what kind of question that is, but yeah.
Here comes Jean Marie with therapist. So I'm going to answer your question because you asked it. You can edit it out if you don't like my answer.
All right.
But I will know what I said. I won't forget. I think that if you did something in front of an audience, you know it works, but you don't feel like it has a future life.
Yeah.
It doesn't need to keep going, but yet you need it to keep going. It's a story that you need to tell yourself. And that's where I say, like, is it a therapy piece, But most of my stuff is a therapy piece. Who am I kidding? These are the things that keep me up at night.
Right.
They're the things that my aunt lovingly reminds me regularly, like, you were the girl at 3 years old who would cry when you saw homeless people. So every time somebody knocks you down because you needed to do something for someone else, just remember that they just don't have the same need to help. I don't need to be needed. That's not my need. I don't need you to call me and be desperate. I just need to know that if something happens, I can react. That's a different need, right? Mm-hmm. And for me, when it comes to doing theater, the need is to create a world that asks people to think a little bit differently about something they may think they already know, but maybe they don't know something about themselves that can identify them to or bring them to the issue from a different way, which might make them engage differently, right? I'm just inviting people into a thought and hoping that either they're going to bring a new thought back to me that I can do something with, or that it will inspire conversation at the very least. If leaving the theater, somebody says, wow, and somebody else says, oh, Bob's your uncle. And they're like, Bob is my uncle. And that's the entire interaction. I'm fine.
Yeah.
But I want to be connecting people. I want to do things that matter. But when I say matter, I don't believe that me doing a play is necessarily going to change the way that we handle the refugee camps globally. However, that's not to say that there isn't enough value that doing one of these pieces couldn't do that, right? So for me, when I bring myself to this work, I have the lofty hope of changing the world and the very baseline of, let me get this out and see what happens. And once it's out, if it seems like no one sees me, no one hears me, then that's where I am. And I'm going to go work on that. But for me, 9 times out of 10, the things come back around. But yeah, being precious it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, and it gets in your way. Like you said, Adam, like you got to let the idea out to let a new one in. I always think of, and I really hope now I'm going to send this to him, my high school French teacher, I still know. And I tortured that man. I tortured him. I tested him more than I tested my parents. I just tested him. And I don't know what it was that made him still like me. He still sends me holiday cards, and I just got a note from him a little while ago. But when I was about 14, I walked into his classroom, and we all had to say why we were taking French. And I said, because you're going to take me to Paris. And he said, no, I'm not. And I said, you asked me a question, I'm answering. For which he said, do you want to stay in this class or should I kick you out? And I said, no, I want to stay. And he said, say it in French. And I said, I can't. You're going to teach me that. You can't kick me out. So 2 years later, we go to Paris. And he had told my mom during the parent-teacher conference, she thinks I'm going to Paris. I did that with the last class. I'm never doing it again. And my mom's like, I guarantee you're going to Paris. So we go to Paris, and we all had to get dressed up one night. We had a very fancy dinner. And that fancy dinner night, for a multitude of reasons, we saw crazy art. He took us to like different places in the city than the rest of the class went to. He just really like left space for my brain, to which I will always be grateful for this person. But we had to wear something that was fancy. And I wore a denim jacket, a beret, I still have it memorized, a red and white striped like dress that I would wear now, like no one would be surprised, and Converse, and this long necklace. And he said, you are not wearing sneakers. And I said, this is chic. And he said, no, you are not wearing sneakers. I said, well, I didn't bring any other shoes, so I guess I am. And about 5 years later, I'm looking at W Magazine, which was at the time, one of the chicest fashion magazines. And here's this centerfold is wearing that outfit. And I ripped it out and I mailed it to him. And I said to him, years from now, I'm going to tell you that I feel lost. You remind me that I'm ahead of my time. Like I'm reminding you that I was ahead of my time. And he called me and he said, I love this letter, blah, blah, blah. I was so mad at you. I'm still mad. But honestly, seeing that picture that many years later has given me confidence to just do the work I want to do and trust that it's going to come around. And if it doesn't find a home, let it go, because something else will come. But
it's beautiful.
I love that. Oh my gosh.
Let it go, Cam.
Oh yeah.
Let it go. Let it go. Whatever it is, you've got another story. Put all the stories under your bed in storage and start a new one. Get new pencils, new crayons, new paper, whatever you got to do.
Totally.
Whatever you got to do. Take Wyatt's next drawing section, have a cocktail, draw away.
Yeah. Totally. As we get close to wrapping up, and we've kind of danced around it a little bit in this conversation, but you mentioned so much about kind of the art of pivoting, which what's that?
Nice.
Yeah. And, that's obviously something you and I have known each other for 9 years now. And I've always known that to be something that is a strong suit of yours. And I think it's a strong suit of a lot of puppeteers, but especially in our times right now, it's something that is so much more important, and a skill that people really, I think, can benefit from. Can you just kind of give us a little sense of either pointers or things that you've learned along the way that like here's a helpful way to be mindful about going in that direction, and knowing when you need to make that change or not?
For me, as an artist, when it comes to pivoting, I'm a terrible meditator, but I do love to meditate. I think meditation, in whatever form it takes place for you, is right. Some people it's a moment, some people it's minutes, some people it's hours. I definitely don't know how that works. Never experienced that. If I did, I'm doing such a good job, I don't remember. But for me, creatively speaking, I lock onto thoughts of people who are change makers when I need to pivot. Like if I feel really stuck, I have a really great book of Nelson Mandela quotes next to my bed that I love. I have a lot of books and I'm not a big reader, so it's funny to say that, but I have a lot of books that I'll just open and read a page, and it's usually a book that isn't aligned with my thinking, and so I have to question something. That helps me shift. I don't know why, but it does. But that helps me open things up. I think finding quotes from people that help you open things up is good. Switching materials is really important. If you're always like sewing again, for me, I forgot. I just worked on a TV show where, do you know how much I sewed? I forgot that I like to sew and that I like to design things. I like color theory. I like looking for stories where perhaps there isn't intended to be one. I like to change. For me, I think it's different for everybody, but I like to look for stories where there aren't any. So I'm going to give you an example of what's been really helpful for me during COVID, like so helpful. And I'm itching for him to come back to this, but Oliver Butler is a director, very well-known director who's now on Broadway. Yay, Oliver. But we went to college together, and we never really got to know each other. We've just always, and literally we live blocks away from each other. We never see each other. I found that out from a friend who lives in Texas. Like, we are always circling but never connect. And when this all happened, he started this Thursday night cooking thing. If you see my Instagram, my personal Instagram, not little shadow Instagram, every Thursday there's different food. And his thing was, it started with potato night. It was baked potato night. And you had to dress, these were his instructions, dress the potato and tell its story.
Oh, wow.
So I was like, great. I made it a velvet dress. I gave it feather hair. I gave it eyes. I wrote a story about it. I put it on Instagram. It was stupid. Everybody else made baked potatoes, loaded it with different things, told the story of how when they were in South Carolina or they were wherever, that this was the experience they had and that's why they made this potato. I messed up the instructions like a true learning challenge person does. And he called it a potato fashion show. I thought I nailed it. I missed the assignment completely, but I wrote this little thing, and in writing the thing, I remembered how fun it is to just have a prompt. Just a prompt, not your prompt, someone else's prompt. Read the spine on a book, that's your prompt. Like, all of those little pivots, that got me cooking again. It got me writing characters. It got me thinking about design, like that stupid potato. And then he started tagging me. So then I started doing it every week, and it became a thing. And now Black Lives Matters happens, and everybody who's on this thing is rightfully boycotting. So there's no more Thursday night cooking. But that pivot of saying, we're going to look at storytelling differently here, guys, to a group of Broadway storytellers was awesome.
Yeah.
So I just encourage everybody, when I think of the word pivot, I think of turn. What do you see? That's your prompt. That's the direction. Just try it. Yeah. It does not matter what it is. If all you see is a roll of duct tape, what are you going to do with that duct tape? Don't tell me. I don't want to know. But what can you do with it? Those little pivots open you wide up. And I had mentioned to Cam that I want to start focusing on helping people pivot and coaching people to pivot, because there's something fantastic about just reading the wrong page of a book. I just did another talk with somebody who they held something up and they said, oh, this could be an interesting shadow. And I said, oh, you know what that could be? That's a great writing prompt. I opened a box of my grandmother's and I found, this is not a true story, and I found this piece of lace amongst a box of letters to a man I've never heard of. What's that story?
Yeah.
Right? But that's a pivot of take this, go the other way than you normally do. See what's there. I think we all need to be doing that right now.
Definitely. No, I think that's going to be really helpful for anybody who's listening and trying to kind of get their engines restarted again. But I think that's a really lovely place to kind of end our part 2 with you. And of course, we'd love to keep this conversation going as more work arises and we have more to discuss. But as we kind of wrap up, do you have a good puppeteer story that you could leave us with to kind of add to our anthology of puppeteer stories?
I have so many.
They should be your own, though.
Yeah.
We know you've learned many of them at the O'Neill.
I dropped an entire show in the middle of Brooklyn. We had an entire show up on cases. Right, the whole show Zwerge was built into cases, and we had everything on rollies. And I hit a bump, and it was pouring out. I hit a bump, and the whole show just like went down Fulton. Buses are coming.
And it's a shadow show, so it was probably a lot of like assets that you couldn't then just like get back.
We ran back and put everything on the heaters, and then I did a lot of hair drying that night. Yeah, there's one. I dropped a show down Fulton Avenue, which is a main street in Brooklyn. That was unfortunate.
Oh my gosh. How soon was the show?
Oh, like a matter of days. We were rehearsing it.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, that was not...
You don't have good luck with traffic, because the last time you were on, you also told us about a car accident that you kind of like envisioned.
I told you that story?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Oh yeah, that's a crazy story.
Yeah.
That is I have so many of those crazy stories of like, what? Like, like premonition, weird, like, I told you that story?
Mm-hmm.
You sure did.
Did I tell you who was involved in it? No.
I don't remember. Adam, you listened to the episode just the other day.
Yeah, I don't remember hearing the names, so I think you said you left them out.
You played that on the episode? I don't remember. Oh God, that was...
It was in there.
Now I want you to get those puppeteers on the show to see if they tell that story as their puppeteer.
I think you mentioned, were you working with Stephen Witterman at the time? Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think you mentioned his name, but I don't know that you mentioned anyone else.
Probably didn't.
Yeah.
Stephen was so freaked out. He was so freaked out. Stephen and I was in Chicago at the, I hope that you edit this like crazy. I was in Chicago at the International Puppetry Festival, Blair Thomas's festival, last January. And that's an awesome festival. And he was so gracious, and he invited me to so many different things, Blair. And I'm walking out the door, and I had just been thinking of Stephen. Like, God, I really need to get in touch with him. And whenever I'm doing something that feels like a new step, I think of Stephen, because he, after Bart Rockburton, gave me my first step. And so I was thinking, I really need to get in touch with him. I'm walking out of the hotel, and he's getting out of the cab and walking in. And I was like, are you at this festival? And he goes, no, there's a flood in my kitchen. It's like, what? He said, we just bought a new house. They had just moved to Chicago, which I knew. And there was a flood in his kitchen, and they had to check into this hotel. And we met in the doorway. And he said, gosh. Linda, who's his wife, is going to freak out. And I said, why? And he said, because she this morning said, have you seen Jean Marie? And he said, I haven't heard from her. And now here you are. And I was like, I think we have Heather Henson and I have that. I can always tell you where in the world she is. It's true.
You just close your eyes and feel it.
$10, she's in Connecticut.
That's great.
Text her right now, I bet you.
Yeah.
That's wonderful.
Awesome.
So, so what's the best way for people to follow your work?
My company is littleshadow.com. No, it's not. It is littleshadowproductions.com. And my personal work, which is mask making and millinery, and some of the puppets are on jeanmarieny.com. So jeanmarieny.com and littleshadowproductions.com.
Great. And there's corresponding, I was going to say, there's corresponding social media for both of those, right?
Yes, absolutely. I'm on Instagram and Facebook. I haven't really been tweeting, although I might get back into that. And I'm about to relaunch my blog series.
Oh, awesome.
Wonderful.
So I'm really excited about that. I hope that people get in touch with me about that, because I really want to incite unique conversations.
And do they find that on your Little Shadow Productions website as well?
Yeah, there's a link. Yep.
Great.
Wonderful.
Excellent. Well, Jean Marie, it was so good to catch up with you. Whenever you want to come back to Puppeteers, just let us know. And just love having this time with you.
Great. Thank you so much, guys. This was really fun.
Yes.
Thank you. All right. Bye.
Bye.
So you said it happened. It happened earlier. Earlier my camera just turned off. I'm like, what the heck? You know how a cord has like that like box in the middle of the cord where it's like replugged in? Apparently it was loose there and it was just running on battery and the battery died.
Oh, okay.
Oh boy, that's why I walked over earlier and did it. And now it's saying that I emptied this card. I don't know. So I just put it in a different card and they said the new card is rewrite protect. I wouldn't read it because it was for a different device. So I'm like, what? I'm sorry.
I've made a huge mistake.